Our definitive journey into the Roman world begins not with a mature emperor, but with a fragile, seemingly minor figure named Gaius Octavius. This young man, through a blend of shrewd political calculation, strategic adoption, and calculated ruthlessness, would ultimately dismantle and then rebuild the entire Roman world, becoming known to history as Augustus, the Revered One. His transformation from a modest heir to the sole master of Rome is a study in ambition and destiny. The birth name and humble beginnings. He was born on September 23rd, 63 BC in Rome. His birth name was Gaius Octavius. Though he was born into the Roman equestrian order, a class of wealthy but non-patrician citizens, his family was respectable but did not belong to the highest echelon of the old Roman nobility. His eventual power would not come from ancient lineage, but from the sudden, violent death of his great-uncle. This original, moderate social standing is important, as it allowed him to later claim a connection to the common people, rather than being seen purely as an elite patrician. The precise location of his birth is sometimes debated, with some sources claiming a family home near the Roman Forum, grounding his origins firmly in the city he would eventually rule. The significance of his father's career. His father, also named Gaius Octavius, was instrumental in establishing the family's upward trajectory. He was the first in their line to achieve the high rank of praetor in Rome, and served with administrative distinction as governor of Macedonia. This achievement, while notable, was a foundation, not a summit. The elder Octavius worked diligently, demonstrating administrative competence and integrity, securing a strong reputation that the young heir could later leverage. It established a model of disciplined public service, contrasting sharply with the chaotic, ambitious political environment Octavius would inherit. Early loss and the crucial maternal link. The defining trauma of his early life was the death of his father when the boy was just 4 years old. This early loss created a vacuum, placing him squarely under the influence of his mother, Atia, who was the daughter of Julia Minor, and thus the niece of Julius Caesar. This maternal link to the most powerful and revolutionary man in the Roman Republic proved to be the single, irreplaceable factor that would shape and ultimately dictate his entire destiny. Atia ensured her son was raised with a keen awareness of his connection to the Caesarian faction, instilling a sense of potential greatness. Caesar's observation and rigorous education. Julius Caesar, who was known for his sharp eye for talent, took a significant personal interest in the boy, Octavius, despite the boy's frequently noted delicate health and quiet temperament. Octavius was subjected to a rigorous education aimed at preparing him for the highest levels of Roman public life. This curriculum placed intense focus on rhetoric, the art of persuasive public speaking, which was vital in the Roman Senate, and military science, the foundation of all Roman power. Caesar's intention was likely to groom him as a political ally, but he ended up inadvertently grooming his own successor. The unexpected heir and the Illyrian absence. The pivotal, world-altering moment occurred on the Ides of March, 44 BC, when Julius Caesar was assassinated by a cabal of senators. At this precise moment, the 19-year-old Octavius was away, engaged in military training and study in Illyria, modern Balkans, a position Caesar had deliberately placed him in for experience. When news of the murder reached him, he made the immediate, courageous, and strategic decision to return to Rome and face the dangers of the political inferno, rather than remaining safely in a military camp. The contents of the will and the legal claim. Upon his return, he discovered the contents of Caesar's last will and testament. The document contained the bombshell that changed history. Julius Caesar had posthumously adopted him as his son, and crucially, named him his principal heir, designating him to receive 3/4 of his immense fortune. This act of adoption was recognized under Roman law, making the young man the legal Gaius Julius Caesar. He saw this inheritance not merely as money, but as an absolute mandate from his assassinated father to claim political power and seek vengeance. The name changed an immediate legitimacy. The adoption instantly triggered his first major and highly strategic name change to Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. By immediately and publicly using the sacred name of Caesar, he laid an undeniable and powerful claim to the loyalty of the late dictator's vast network of veteran soldiers, the engine of Roman military power, and the political support of the Roman plebs, who revered Caesar's memory. The name itself became his greatest political weapon, conferring a legitimacy no rival could touch. The age of the heir and the veteran's dismissal. When he claimed this immense political and financial legacy, Octavian was a mere 19 years old. His extreme youth and lack of battle experience were initially perceived as a critical weakness by political veterans, particularly Mark Antony, Caesar's most prominent lieutenant. Antony, who was in his 40s and a seasoned general, mistakenly dismissed Octavian as a mere boy who could be easily manipulated or sidelined, a fatal miscalculation that Octavian would exploit. The initial confrontation with Antony. The young Octavian immediately entered into a tense and dramatic political confrontation with Mark Antony. Antony, believing he was the natural successor and already in possession of Caesar's public funds, refused to hand over Caesar's private money to the heir. In a move of brilliant political theater, Octavian chose to fund Caesar's promised bequests, a gift of money to every Roman citizen out of his own personal, inherited funds. This act of profound generosity and commitment to Caesar's memory instantly won him massive popular support and demonstrated a political will far exceeding his years. The formation of the Second Triumvirate, 43 BC. Recognizing that he was too young to defeat the veteran Antony alone, Octavian executed a diplomatic reversal and formed a necessary, if deeply unstable, alliance in 43 BC with Antony and a third, less influential general, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. This alliance, known as the Second Triumvirate, was distinct from the first. It was a legally ratified official dictatorship designed to jointly rule the republic, restore order, and execute the final revenge against Caesar's murderers. The prescriptions and the calculated guilt. The triumvirate immediately instituted the prescriptions, a brutal campaign of state-sponsored murder aimed at eliminating political enemies and, crucially, seizing their valuable assets to fund their armies. Thousands were killed, including the great orator Cicero, whose death Antony demanded. Octavian, despite his later public image as a man of clemency and mercy, participated fully in this horrific bloodshed, personally signing the death warrants of men who had previously supported him. This act ensured he bore shared guilt for the terror, an act of calculated ruthlessness that secured his finances and demonstrated his absolute commitment to securing power, even at the highest moral cost. This initial phase, defined by his strategic adoption of the name Caesar, his immediate generosity to the plebs, and his chilling willingness to engage in political violence, revealed the complex nature of the young Octavian. He was willing to be brutal when necessary, but always with a calculated view toward establishing the popular and military legitimacy that would allow him to dominate the Republic. His next challenge was dealing with the dissolving partnership and confronting the magnetic but increasingly erratic rival, Mark Antony. The success of the triumvirate in eliminating the assassins was merely the prelude to the true, final struggle for world supremacy. With their enemies defeated, the three rulers had to determine how to carve up the world, a geopolitical decision that set Octavian on an irreversible collision course with the celebrated yet increasingly Roman alien, Mark Antony. The triumvirate dissolves, and the clash of civilizations, with the assassins of Caesar decisively defeated at Philippi. The necessity for the second triumvirate began to fade, replaced by an underlying, inevitable tension. The Roman world was divided, and the immense egos and differing ambitions of Octavian and Antony set them on a path toward the final, defining conflict that would end the Republic. The geopolitical division of the world. Following the victory at Philippi, the second triumvirate formally agrees on a division of the Roman world, a vast territory that spanned the Mediterranean. Octavian took control of the Roman West, Italy, Gaul, and Spain, which included the capital city of Rome and its crucial political structure. Mark Antony took the wealthier East, Greece, Asia Minor, Egypt, and the Levant, giving him access to immense resources and a direct pathway to potential military campaigns against Parthia. Lepidus, the weakest partner, was largely sidelined with control over Africa. The marriage diplomacy, Antony and Octavia. In an attempt to cement the unstable alliance, diplomatic efforts culminated in 40 BC with the marriage of Mark Antony to Octavia Minor, the older and politically savvy sister of Octavian. This was a classic Roman political marriage, designed to establish familial harmony between the two most powerful men in the world, though it ultimately proved insufficient to contain their rivalry. Octavian's focus, securing the West. While Antony was distracted by the wealth and complexity of the East, Octavian dedicated himself to the immediate, critical task of securing and stabilizing the Roman West. This required him to address two immense and immediate problems: the land distribution for over 100,000 demobilized veterans, and the relentless military threat posed by Sextus Pompey, the last surviving son of Pompey the Great. The Perusine War, 4140 BC. The difficulty of relocating and paying the veterans led to the Perusine War in Italy against Antony's brother, Lucius Antonius, and Antony's wife, Fulvia. Octavian ruthlessly crushed this internal opposition, solidifying his undisputed military control over the Italian peninsula, forcing Antony's allies to recognize Octavian as the sovereign power in Rome itself. The defeat of Sextus Pompey. The military threat from Sextus Pompey was existential. Pompey controlled a massive fleet and had effectively established a naval blockade of Italy, cutting off vital grain supplies to Rome and causing famine. This crisis forced Octavian to dedicate immense resources to building his own fleet under the command of his supremely talented friend and general, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. The naval triumph at Naulocus, 36 BC. The naval war against Pompey culminated in 36 BC at the Battle of Naulocus, where Agrippa's superior fleet decisively annihilated Pompey's forces. This victory was a turning point, securing the supply routes for Rome and establishing Octavian's dominance over the western seas, providing him with a profound sense of military prestige he had previously lacked. The ousting of Lepidus, year 36 BC. Following the defeat of Pompey, Lepidus, sensing weakness and opportunity, attempted to challenge Octavian for control of Sicily. Octavian, acting swiftly and decisively, politically outmaneuvered him. Octavian managed to convince Lepidus's own legions to defect, effectively stripping Lepidus of all military and political power. Lepidus was permitted to live out his days in quiet exile as the Pontifex Maximus, chief priest, marking the official end of the triumvirate and leaving only two contenders. Antony's eastern distractions. While Octavian was consolidating the West, Mark Antony was becoming increasingly immersed in the affairs of the East, most notably through his relationship with Cleopatra VII, the powerful Queen of Egypt. Antony's costly and ultimately unsuccessful military campaigns against the Parthian Empire further drained his resources and damaged his reputation in Rome. The propaganda war against Antony. Octavian launched a relentless, sophisticated propaganda war against Antony back in Rome. He skillfully portrayed Antony not as a fellow Roman, but as a man corrupted by the Orient, a slave to the foreign, luxurious, and decadent power of Cleopatra. This campaign painted the upcoming conflict not as a civil war between two Romans, but as a patriotic defense of Roman values against a foreign queen. The political crisis and the will. The decisive piece of propaganda came when Octavian illegally seized and publicly read Antony's will, which had been deposited with the Vestal Virgins in Rome. The contents allegedly confirmed Antony's plans to be buried in Alexandria alongside Cleopatra and to bestow vast Roman territories upon their children, fueling fears that Antony intended to move the capital of the Roman Empire to Egypt. The final justification for war. Armed with this public outrage, Octavian successfully convinced the Senate and the Roman people to declare war. Crucially, the declaration of war in 32 BC was not against the Roman citizen Mark Antony, but formally against the foreign power, Queen Cleopatra. This legalistic distinction maintained the fiction that Octavian was defending the Republic, not initiating another civil war. The stage was now set for the final, irreversible confrontation that would determine the future of Rome. Octavian had masterfully transformed a personal power struggle into a battle for the moral soul of the Roman civilization, positioning himself as the indispensable savior of the West. His final victory would be achieved at sea. The final showdown at Actium and the sole master of Rome, the sophisticated propaganda war launched by Octavian, reached its inevitable military conclusion. The confrontation with Antony and Cleopatra was not just a battle for political control. It was framed as a defense of Rome's very identity against foreign corruption. This final act of war would destroy the last vestiges of the Republic and crown Octavian as the world's sole ruler. The naval confrontation at Actium in 31 BC. The decisive clash occurred at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC off the western coast of Greece. It was a massive naval engagement that pitted the forces of Octavian, commanded by the brilliant general Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, against the combined navies of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. This battle was strategically crucial, as it would decide control of the Mediterranean Sea, and therefore the entire Roman world. The strategic failure of Antony and Cleopatra. Though the two fleets were roughly equal in size, Antony's ships were mostly large, cumbersome, floating fortresses, while Agrippa employed smaller, faster, and highly maneuverable ships. Crucially, in the midst of the battle, Cleopatra abruptly sailed her 60 Egyptian ships out of the line of fire, heading toward Egypt. Mark Antony, seeing her departure, abandoned his own command and followed her. This act of flight was catastrophic, robbing Antony's remaining forces of leadership and morale. The aftermath and Octavian's vengeance. Antony's remaining fleet, without direction, was quickly surrounded and destroyed by Agrippa. The political fallout was immediate and absolute. Octavian had not only won the war, but had decisively branded Antony as a coward who had abandoned his men and his country for a foreign woman. This propaganda point, that Antony was a weak lover, not a true Roman general, was forever sealed by his actions at Actium, the pursuit and the deaths in Egypt, 30 BC. Octavian and Agrippa immediately pursued the fleeing couple to Egypt. They landed in Alexandria in 30 BC, where both Antony and Cleopatra met their ends. Mark Antony, receiving false news of Cleopatra's death, fell upon his own sword. Cleopatra later committed suicide, famously using an ASP, Egyptian cobra, to avoid the immense humiliation of being paraded as a captive in Octavian's inevitable triumph in Rome. The end of the Ptolemaic dynasty. With Cleopatra's death, the entire Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled Egypt since the time of Alexander the Great, came to an end. This was a monumental shift in world power. Octavian personally annexed Egypt, declaring it a private imperial province to be administered solely by a Roman prefect, ensuring that its immense wealth, the grain basket of the Mediterranean, could never again fall under the control of a rival. The final title, Textit Imperator Caesar Divi. Filius, Octavian returned to Rome as the undisputed sole victor, having no living military or political rival. His title upon returning was highly significant. Catextit Imperator Caesar Divi Filius, Commander Caesar, son of the divine. The title Catextit Imperator underscored his military supremacy, while Distextit Divi Filius, son of the divine, capitalized on the Senate's recent deification of Julius Caesar, giving Octavian a potent, semi-divine legitimacy. The demobilization of the armies. The most critical problem facing the war-weary state was the existence of 60 active legions, numbering nearly 500,000 men, all loyal to their commanders and potentially capable of sparking a new civil war. Octavian's mastery was in successfully demobilizing or retraining these men. He settled vast numbers of veterans with land grants, establishing numerous new colonies across the empire and consolidating the remaining forces into a standing army of 28 legions. This professionalization of the military was essential for the long-term stability of the empire, the first constitutional settlement in 27 BC. After years of dictatorship, Octavian masterfully orchestrated his transition back to civilian rule. In 27 BC, he dramatically appeared before the Senate and formally offered to resign all his extraordinary powers, supposedly restoring control back to the Senate and the Roman people. The political theater of restoration. The Senate, in a carefully staged display of relief and gratitude, formally refused his offer and instead bestowed upon him an array of honors and offices that collectively kept him in power while maintaining the fiction of the restored republic. He was granted military command, Textit Imperium, over the key provinces where legions were stationed. The new name, Augustus. The most important honor the Senate bestowed upon him in 27 BC was the completely new, unparalleled name, Augustus. This Latin word carries a sacred, almost religious connotation, meaning venerable or revered one. The name distanced him from the violence of Octavian and the dictatorship of Caesar, signaling a fresh start defined by peace and sanctity. This title is the one by which history remembers him. The meaning of the Principate. The new form of government he created is known as the Principate, signifying rule by the Catextet Princeps, Muse, first citizen. Augustus never took the title of king, nol textit rex, or permanent dictator. Instead, he consolidated power by holding multiple key republican offices thus simultaneously, such as proconsular imperium, supreme military command, and tribunitian power, the veto power of the plebeian tribunes. Power without title. The genius of the Principate was that Augustus held more practical power than any previous king or dictator, but achieved this by carefully avoiding the hated titles of monarchy. He was simply the Arts Textit Princeps, the first among equals, while ensuring that no public servant could ever politically challenge his combined authorities. This structural innovation was the foundation of the Roman Empire for centuries, the cloak of republicanism. Augustus consciously maintained all the vestiges of the republican system. The Senate continued to meet, elections were held, and magistrates were appointed. However, the true authority rested entirely with the non-texted in princeps. This cloak of republicanism provided stability and reconciled the old aristocracy to the new reality of one-man rule. The culmination of the civil wars at Actium and the subsequent constitutional settlement of 27 BC did not simply result in a new ruler, it resulted in a wholly new political system. The Republic was dead, but Augustus had successfully masked the birth of the Roman Empire under the guise of its peaceful restoration. His next great act was to secure his position through architectural splendor and cultural renewal. With his political and military position secured, Augustus turned his attention to the capital itself, embarking on an architectural and moral renaissance designed to visually and symbolically justify his rule, transforming Rome from a city of brick into a city of marble and virtue. Transforming the city, architecture, morality, and propaganda. With his political and military position secured by the Actium victory and the constitutional settlement of 27 BC, Augustus turned his immense authority toward a new mission, the moral and physical reconstruction of Rome. This was not mere urban renewal, but a calculated lifelong campaign of propaganda designed to visually and symbolically justify his sole rule and the peace it brought. The vow to transform Rome. Augustus famously boasted, "I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble." This quote summarizes his ambition for the capital. The city had suffered neglect and decay during the civil wars, and Augustus used the vast wealth seized from Egypt to finance an unprecedented architectural revolution. This transformation was a potent political statement, symbolizing the durable and renewed permanence of his regime after a century of instability. The marble buildings were concrete proof of the Pax Augusta, the peace he brought. The Forum of Augustus and the Temple of Mars Ultor. His personal contribution to the city was centered on the magnificent Forum of Augustus. The centerpiece of this forum was the Temple of Mars Ultor, Mars the Avenger. This temple was dedicated in 2 BC and served two functions. First, it fulfilled a vow Augustus made before the Battle of Philippi to avenge Caesar's murder, and second, it permanently linked the new regime to the concept of justice, retribution, and military victory, reinforcing the divine sanction for his rule. The resurgence of traditional religion. Augustus systematically revived and funded the traditional Roman state religion, which had fallen into disuse and skepticism during the Republic's chaos. He restored 82 temples in Rome alone and revived ancient, obscure religious cults and priesthoods such as the Fratres Arveles. This spiritual restoration was meant to signal a return to the moral purity and piety of Rome's legendary past, which he claimed to embody. His role as Pontifex Maximus. When the former Pontifex Maximus, Lepidus, finally died in 12 BC, Augustus immediately claimed the title, becoming the chief priest of the Roman state. By combining this supreme religious authority with his military, Syntaxit, imperator, and civic authority, Verbatextit to princeps, he ensured that he was the absolute, singular link between the gods and the Roman people, completing the consolidation of power. The Mertextit in Arapacis Augustae, altar of Augustan peace. Perhaps the most enduring piece of Augustan propaganda is the Nadextit Arapacis, altar of peace, dedicated in 9 BC. This monumental altar was a lavishly sculpted monument celebrating the peace and prosperity that followed the civil wars. Its famous friezes depict Augustus, his family, and various priests in a processional state, presenting the new ruling family not as tyrants, but as pious, peace-loving restorers of Rome's golden age. The moral legislation. Tis legis Iuliae. Augustus, perceiving that the chaos of the late Republic had eroded family values, enacted severe and transformative moral legislation known as the Kingstextit Legis Iulies, Julian laws beginning around 18 BC. These laws aimed to curb adultery, discourage bachelorhood, and encourage marriage and high birth rates among the Roman elite, actively promoting a return to the severe, disciplined morality of the early Republic. The penalties for adultery. The most drastic of the Julian laws concerned adultery, Xetextit et adulterium. Under these laws, adultery was made a public crime, punishable by exile and the confiscation of property rather than just a private family matter. Augustus tragically applied this law strictly, even exiling his own daughter, Julia the Elder, for her scandalous conduct, demonstrating his personal commitment to the moral revival. Patronage of the arts, the Augustan Age of Literature. Augustus actively sponsored a circle of poets, writers, and artists through his friend and advisor, Gaius Maecenas. This resulted in the famous Augustan Age of Literature, the golden age of Roman letters. Writers like Virgil, the Aeneid, so are Horace, and Ovid received patronage with their works often subtly or explicitly praising the Augustan peace and his personal virtues. Virgil's Texted Aeneid and the foundation. Myth. Virgil's epic poem, Texted the Aeneid, was commissioned explicitly to give Rome a founding myth comparable to Homer's epics. It traced Rome's origins to the Trojan hero Aeneas, who was an ancestor of the Julian family. This work solidified the divine heroic lineage of Augustus and presented his reign as the long-awaited fulfillment of Roman destiny. The role of Maecenas. Gaius Maecenas was not a general or a politician, but Augustus's chief cultural advisor and patron. His work established the enduring model of state patronage of the arts, ensuring that the most brilliant literary minds of the era dedicated their genius to celebrating the virtues of the new regime and securing its place in history. The cult of the emperor and the provinces. To bind the vast, diverse empire together, Augustus cautiously allowed the growth of the imperial cult in the provinces. While he was never openly worshipped as a god in Rome during his lifetime to avoid offending republican sensibilities, in the provinces, temples were erected to Roma and Augustus, linking the loyalty to the city with devotion to the emperor as a divine guarantor of peace. The meticulous, systematic rebuilding of Rome, from its temples and forums to its very moral code, was Augustus's way of securing his power without legions. By associating himself with peace, piety, and the golden past, he made his personal rule seem not like a dictatorship, but like a necessary, benevolent force that rescued Rome from itself. His next great task was securing the vast and difficult frontiers of this newly stable empire. With the home front stabilized and morally renewed, the focus shifted to the immense logistical and military challenge of maintaining peace across the vast imperial frontiers, a task that demanded administrative genius and the establishment of a professional military. Securing the empire, military reforms, and the end of expansion. With the moral and architectural renewal of Rome underway, Augustus turned his attention to the immense existential challenge of securing the boundaries of an empire that stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Euphrates River. This necessary consolidation required not just battlefield victories, but profound administrative and economic genius to ensure the long-term stability and funding of the unprecedented peace known as the Pax Romana. The new standing professional army. One of Augustus's most revolutionary and enduring reforms was the creation of the first permanent professional standing army in Roman history, a departure from the temporary politically loyal armies of the late Republic. He radically reduced the vast number of legions that existed during the Civil War era, which at one point numbered 60, to a manageable standardized force of 28 legions, approximately 150,000 professional heavy infantry. This stabilization achieved several critical goals. It dramatically lowered the constant threat of ambitious generals raising their own forces. It ensured the soldiers were paid by and loyal to the state, and therefore to the princeps, and it created a fixed professional budget for defense, replacing the chaotic, resource-draining levies of the past century. The establishment of the Praetorian Guard, to protect himself and to exert subtle psychological control over the capital city, Augustus established the Praetorian Guard in 27 BC. This was a highly paid elite force of 9 cohorts, later expanded, whose primary duty was to guard the person of the princeps. Crucially, unlike the legions stationed on the frontiers, the Praetorian cohorts were stationed near Rome, with 3 cohorts actually housed inside the city, effectively giving Augustus a rapid reaction force and a highly visible symbol of his personal military authority right at the heart of the government. While essential for his security and the prevention of assassinations, the immense privilege and proximity to power eventually corrupted the Guard, making it infamous in later imperial history for its ability to install and depose emperors through assassinations and coups. Defining the fixed frontiers. Augustus was one of the first Roman leaders to truly grasp the financial and logistical impossibility of infinite expansion. He established a clear, definitive policy of limiting expansion and concentrating military efforts instead on securing natural, defensible frontiers. These borders were primarily defined by great rivers, such as the powerful Rhine in the west and the mighty Danube in the east. This strategic shift was a profound intellectual move, transforming the empire's military focus from perpetual conquest, which constantly strained resources, to consolidation and administration of the immense territory already conquered, thus preserving resources for the long-term Pax Romana. The policy of defensive wars. His military strategy transitioned from the aggressive, often opportunistic campaigns of the Republic to calculated defensive wars designed solely to protect existing borders and eliminate immediate, quantifiable threats to Rome's territories. This crucial change meant that the legions were largely stationary, policing and maintaining the borders rather than continuously pushing them outward. This enforced quietude was a key component of the Pax Romana, allowing trade and culture to flourish without the disruption of constant military mobilization. The disaster in the Teutoburg Forest, 9 AD, the most devastating military setback of Augustus's entire reign, and a moment that permanently altered the map of Europe, occurred in 9 AD when 3 full Roman legions, led by Publius Quintilius Varus, were ambushed and annihilated by a coalition of Germanic tribes under the leadership of Arminius, a Roman-trained chief. The loss of nearly 20,000 men was a psychological and military blow of immense proportion. Augustus reportedly took the disaster as a personal failure, falling into a deep state of mourning, and according to Suetonius, would occasionally strike his head against the doorpost, crying out in anguish, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions," the finality of the Rhine frontier. The catastrophe at Teutoburg Forest definitively convinced Augustus to abandon any permanent Roman claim to the territory east of the Rhine River. This decision established the Rhine and the Danube as the permanent boundary between the Roman world and the unsettled Germanic tribes for the next 400 years. It was a clear acknowledgement of the limits of Roman power and a commitment to the new policy of consolidation over expansion, even in the face of a tempting but ultimately indefensible territory. The administrative and fiscal revolution. To reliably fund his professional army, pay the veterans, and finance the massive public works projects, Augustus instituted a complete administrative and fiscal overhaul of the entire empire. He initiated a thorough, systematic census of the entire Roman population and its wealth, which established a rationalized, predictable, and centrally managed taxation system, the fiscus. This methodical, bureaucratic accounting replaced the corrupt, erratic republican system of tax farming, where private contractors often brutally exploited the provinces for immense profit. This single reform dramatically increased the wealth and financial stability of the central government. The establishment of the contextit cursus publicus, the imperial post, recognizing that effective governance of an enormous empire required rapid communication, Augustus established the mos textit cursus publicus, the imperial postal and transport system. This sophisticated network utilized standardized staging posts, fresh relay horses, and official couriers placed at regular intervals along the great Roman roads. This ensured that government edicts, vital military intelligence, and official communications could travel with unprecedented speed and reliability across thousands of miles, unifying the distant administrative centers with Rome. provincial governance reform, Augustus systematically eliminated the republican custom of allowing powerful, self-interested senators to mercilessly exploit provinces. He strategically divided the provinces into two categories to ensure his own military dominance: imperial provinces, those requiring legions, like Syria and Gaul, were governed directly by his appointed legates, and senatorial provinces, those long pacified, governed by Senate-appointed proconsuls. This structural reform ensured that the Nautexticius Imperator controlled the entirety of the Roman military machine, and by extension, the most strategically vital regions of the empire. The Great Road Building Program. Augustus initiated an extensive, unprecedented road building program across the entire Mediterranean world. These military-grade roads were essential not just for facilitating trade and commerce, but primarily for the rapid deployment of legions to suppress local revolts or contain external threats quickly. He famously erected the Hextit Miliarium Aureum, a golden milestone, in the Roman Forum, a bronze marker that symbolically indicated the starting point and measured distance for all the major roads radiating from the capital. The economic boom and monetary reform. The imposition of peace and stability under the Pax Romana unleashed an enormous, sustained economic boom. With secure borders and trade routes protected by the standing army, trade flourished across the Mediterranean. Augustus further facilitated this by reforming the Roman currency, ensuring a stable, universally accepted standard of gold and silver coinage. This consistent monetary value facilitated long-distance commerce and permanently integrated the vast, diverse economies of the empire under Roman central authority. The reforms enacted by Augustus were far more complex and foundational than simple military victories. By professionalizing the army, rationalizing the finances, and deliberately defining and defending the frontiers, he created a self-sustaining, stable system, the Roman Empire, that would endure for centuries, funded by the peace it enforced. His final, and arguably most difficult challenge, would be securing the continuity of this revolutionary system through a suitable heir. The unifier of Rome, the age of Augustus, the tragedy of succession, dynastic ambition, and personal loss. Having secured the empire externally and stabilized it administratively, Augustus faced his most personal and politically agonizing challenge: securing the succession. The Principate was founded on the fiction of the restored republic, but it was, in practical reality, a monarchy, and a smooth, undisputed transfer of power was absolutely essential to prevent the entire system from collapsing back into civil war upon his death. This led to decades of intense dynastic maneuvering, a period of his life that was marked by immense personal ambition, but also profound, successive tragedy. The constitutional problem of succession, the genius and simultaneously the ultimate structural weakness of the Principate, lay in its ambiguity. Since Augustus consistently and publicly claimed to be merely the first citizen, princeps, there was no formal, constitutional, or legal mechanism for succession akin to a modern crown being passed down. He could not simply appoint an heir through a decree. He could only groom one. This grooming process required his chosen successor to gradually accumulate the exact same collection of key republican offices, immense military authority, imperium, and essential civic powers like the tribunician power that he himself held. This necessary process of political and military education was intensely precarious and subject to the whims of fate. The priority of Agrippa. Augustus's first, most competent, and most reliable choice for a successor was not a direct blood relative, but his lifelong, highly trusted friend and the brilliantly successful general Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Agrippa possessed the essential qualifications for continuity: unshakable personal loyalty to Augustus, unquestioned military genius, recognized by the legions, and immense popularity with the Roman populace. Augustus signaled his serious intention by conferring the proconsular imperium, supreme military command, and the crucial tribunician power upon Agrippa, effectively making him a co-regent who shared the constitutional powers of the princeps. The marriage of Julia and Agrippa. To solidify this political arrangement with an undeniable dynastic bond, Augustus made the difficult decision to force his only natural child, his highly intelligent and spirited daughter Julia the Elder, to marry Agrippa in 21 BC. This marriage was not about love, but about state building. Crucially, the union produced several sons, whom Augustus immediately adopted, thereby establishing the first clear and seemingly durable line of succession through his direct male descendants, linking the military strength of Agrippa to the Julian name. The education of Gaius and Lucius Caesar. From the marriage of Julia and Agrippa, 2 grandsons were born, Gaius Caesar and Lucius Caesar. Augustus demonstrated his urgency by immediately adopting both boys as his own legal sons and designated heirs. He took personal responsibility for overseeing their extremely rigorous political and military education from infancy, projecting them publicly as the future joint leaders of Rome. He even bestowed upon them the unique title Principes Juventutis, leaders of the youth, making them highly visible, almost royal, symbols of the continuity and future stability of the Augustan regime across all public art and coinage. The loss of Agrippa. The perfectly laid plans and the long-term vision of a smooth transition were shattered when Agrippa died suddenly and unexpectedly in 12 BC. Agrippa was only 51, and his death was a profound political disaster for Augustus. It removed his most competent partner, destabilized the political landscape, and forced a complete anxious recalculation of the succession plan. This loss, following the deaths of other potential allies, introduced a wave of pessimism and genuine uncertainty among the Roman elite regarding the divine favor and stability of the new political system. The tragic deaths of Gaius and Lucius. The dynastic tragedies continued and intensified. Augustus's 2 beloved grandsons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, the designated heirs and the hope of the entire Julian line, both suffered untimely deaths while they were away on important military and diplomatic campaigns in the east. Lucius died first in 2 AD, and Gaius died shortly thereafter in 4 AD. These successive, heartbreaking losses of the intended heirs were interpreted by many conservative Romans as a sign of divine disfavor against the new political order, profoundly fueling Augustus's personal anxiety and grief over the fate of his regime. The exile of Julia the Elder. The personal and political drama was compounded by the devastating scandal involving his only natural child, Julia the Elder. Her reckless public behavior and repeated affairs directly violated her father's own strict moral laws, leges Juliae, aimed at promoting chastity and marital fidelity among the elite. In 2 BC, Augustus, prioritizing the symbolic purity of his moral legislation above all paternal love, reluctantly but ruthlessly exiled Julia to a desolate island. He later declared publicly that the need for the moral restoration of Rome was so severe that he would rather have been childless than have a daughter who behaved so shamefully, a sacrifice that cemented his image as a man of public principle. The adoption of Tiberius. Stripped of his preferred Julian line heirs, Augustus was left with only one remaining reliable male relative, his stepson, Tiberius Claudius Nero, the son of his wife Livia from her previous marriage. In 4 AD, Augustus reluctantly adopted Tiberius, a move he clearly preferred to avoid. The adoption was made under highly specific, and for Tiberius, highly unfavorable terms. Tiberius was immediately compelled to, in turn, adopt his own young nephew, Germanicus, who possessed a Julian bloodline as Augustus's great-nephew, ensuring that the Julian bloodline remained at least symbolically present in the line of succession. The mandate of co-regency for Tiberius. Before his death, Augustus executed the final, masterful legal move to guarantee a peaceful transfer. He conferred upon Tiberius the essential components of imperial authority: tribunician power for life and a share of the superior proconsular imperium. This strategic move ensured that when Augustus finally died, Tiberius would not have to seize power through war or debate. He would simply be the surviving co-ruler who already possessed all the accumulated legal components of the principate. This engineered transfer of authority was the critical, successful piece of constitutional engineering that secured stability. The role of Livia Drusilla. Throughout the decades of intense dynastic struggles, Augustus's wife, Livia Drusilla, played an exceptionally powerful, subtle, and controversial role at court. Livia was a woman of immense intelligence, ambition, and political astuteness who was widely suspected by ancient historians and rumor mills of having ruthlessly cleared the path for her own son Tiberius to ascend to power by orchestrating the mysterious deaths and setbacks of the Julian heirs. While unproven, these suspicions highlight the intense political drama and danger that surrounded the issue of succession. The lasting legacy of the dynastic principle. Although his specific choices were forced by tragedy and political necessity, Augustus successfully established the fundamental non-republican principle that the rule of Rome was tied to a single dynastic family, the Domus Augusta. The Julian-Claudian dynasty, which followed his death, ruled the empire for the next half-century, a testament to the essential stability provided by this carefully managed dynastic transition. Augustus and the Domus Augusta. Augustus deliberately cultivated the image of his entire extended family, known as the Domus Augusta, the Augustan household, as a sacred, moral, and stabilizing force for the entire empire. Public art, coinage, and monuments frequently featured his adopted heirs and family members, thereby linking the health and prosperity of the Roman state directly to the personal fortunes and piety of the ruling house, effectively making the imperial family a central political and religious institution. The narrative of succession reveals the deep personal cost of securing the empire. Augustus sacrificed family loyalty and personal happiness to ensure the survival of his political creation. The Principate was secured not by easy military victories, but by surviving the heartbreaking series of losses that defined the second half of his reign. This ultimate political stability was his final, most enduring gift to Rome. The final accounting, the res gestae, and the ultimate legacy. Having ruled for over 4 decades, an unprecedented tenure that had witnessed the full transformation of the political landscape. Augustus knew that his final and greatest challenge was not simply living long, but controlling how history and his successors would ultimately remember him. To secure his narrative against the inevitable erosion of time and the hostility of future rivals, he composed a unique and unparalleled public document, a meticulous, first-person record of his entire life's work, which remains the definitive source for understanding his strategic self-presentation. The creation of the Res Gestae Divi Augusti. Toward the very end of his exceptionally long life, Augustus personally composed this highly selective, first-person account of his accomplishments, titled Res Gestae Divi Augusti, The Deeds of the Divine Augustus. This document was intended to function as his definitive political autobiography, acting as a profound statement of legacy and a lasting political blueprint for the continuity of the Principate. It stands today as a masterpiece of calculated political communication and highly sophisticated state propaganda, carefully curated to frame his entire reign as an inevitable, divinely favored success. The mandate for public display. Augustus, fully aware of the power of public messaging, left strict, specific instructions in his will for the Res Gestae to be engraved on monumental bronze pillars and publicly displayed outside his massive, imposing mausoleum in Rome. This ensured maximum, continuous visibility in the capital for future generations. Furthermore, copies were mandated to be distributed and carved into durable stone on the walls of temples throughout the empire. The most complete and best preserved surviving copy of this entire document, found meticulously inscribed on the walls of the Temple of Augustus and Roma in Ancyra, modern Ankara, Turkey, is famously known today as the Monumentum Ancyranum, which serves as the primary and most vital source for understanding Augustus's own calculated view of his 60 years in power. The structured narrative of the document. The document is systematically and brilliantly structured into 4 distinct sections to cover every aspect of his imperial claim and justify his singular position. Political life and honors. This section details the specific honors, military commands, and key constitutional offices he held throughout his decades of public life, carefully listing them to show a steady, lawful accumulation of power. Expenditures and generosity. This part serves as a massive financial ledger, listing the enormous sums of money he personally spent on the Roman people, including direct cash gifts, congiaria, to citizens and demobilized veterans, and the funding of colossal public works and monuments across Italy and the provinces. Military deeds and diplomacy. This summarizes his vast military victories, the conquest of new provinces like Egypt, and crucial diplomatic achievements, such as the symbolically important recovery of the military standards, Aquilae, lost to the Parthians by previous generals. The status of the princeps. The concluding section summarizes his unique and unparalleled status, emphasizing the unanimous consensus of the Senate and people regarding his supreme moral authority, thereby justifying the entire new political order. The central propaganda of restoration. The central, deliberate, and necessary fiction perpetuated by the entire Res Gestae is the concept of restoration. Augustus consistently and publicly emphasized that he was not a revolutionary or a dictator who had violently seized power, but the humble citizen who, facing chaos, had restored the republic and formally handed back the state to the Senate and the Roman people. This carefully crafted narrative served as the ultimate political shield, legitimizing his absolute one-man power by paradoxically denying its autocratic existence. The strategic omission of violence in this final public accounting intended for posterity, Augustus strategically and meticulously omitted any direct mention of the civil wars, the brutal proscriptions, or the execution of his personal and political enemies. The figures of Mark Antony and Lepidus are simply coldly referred to as the faction that made war on the Republic. This deliberate sanitization of the violent reality of his ascent was paramount for cementing his public image as the peaceful, benevolent restorer of law and order necessary for securing the public's long-term acquiescence to the Principate. The Auctoritas claim. Augustus cleverly concluded the res gestae by making a crucial, masterful distinction. He stated that, while he held no more official power than his many Republican colleagues, a technically legalistic but functionally false claim, he surpassed everyone in Auctoritas, a uniquely Roman concept meaning prestige, influence, or moral authority. This term effectively summarizes the invisible but ultimate source of his true, lasting power, the profound reverence, trust, and moral sway he commanded from the military, the Senate, and the general populace due to his achievements and longevity. The final illness and death. Augustus died on August 19th, 14th AD, at the age of 75, after a long life marked by continuous illness. He died in the town of Nola, near Naples, in the very same house where his own father had died decades earlier, providing a convenient full-circle narrative. The historian Suetonius notes that his devoted wife Livia was at his side, reinforcing the carefully managed public image of a peaceful, inevitable, and domestic conclusion to his long life. His alleged last words. His legendary final words, according to the historian Suetonius, were not purely political, but deeply theatrical and revealing of his self-awareness. He is famously said to have asked those around him if he had played the part well in the comedy of life, mimum vitae. This phrase is profoundly revealing, suggesting that even in his final moments, Augustus was keenly aware that his entire reign had been a calculated public performance, a carefully managed role designed to establish and maintain the fundamental stability of the empire. His funeral and deification. Following his death, Augustus was given a magnificent and highly symbolic public funeral in Rome. His body was cremated and his ashes were placed in the enormous mausoleum of Augustus. Crucially, the Senate immediately and formally deified him, proclaiming him Divus Augustus, the divine Augustus. This ensured that the imperial cult was permanently tied to his name, and that his title of Devi Filius, son of the divine, passed legally and seamlessly to his chosen successor, Tiberius, ensuring the new regime had divine sanction. The Mausoleum of Augustus. The construction of the Mausoleum of Augustus, begun immediately after his victory over Antony in 28 BC, was a massive circular tomb that served as a powerful, non-negotiable statement of dynastic intent. Its sheer size and the fact that it was built so early in his reign demonstrated his long-term dynastic planning and the permanence he intended for his family's rule, signifying that he viewed Rome as his ancestral home, not merely a temporary political stage. The legacy of the Pax Romana. Augustus's most enduring and tangible legacy was the Pax Romana, Roman peace, an unprecedented foundational period of peace, internal stability, and massive prosperity that ultimately lasted for over 2 centuries. This era of order and secure trade transformed the entire Mediterranean world, allowing for an immense flourishing of commerce, standardized law, and infrastructure across 3 continents. The establishment of the Julian-Claudian dynasty. Though he faced immense personal tragedy in his attempts at succession, the system Augustus established successfully ensured the continuous transition of power to Tiberius, thereby initiating the Julian-Claudian dynasty, which included the subsequent rulers Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. This established the vital, non-republican precedent of hereditary succession that defined the entire imperial system for centuries, providing crucial stability even when his successors proved disastrous. The unification of the empire. Augustus single-handedly unified an empire fractured and exhausted by a century of relentless civil war, transitioning it from a perpetually warring republic to a globally stable, autocratic state. His governance model, the Principate, lasted for over 450 years in the West and over 1,400 years in the East, a testament to his sheer political and administrative genius in creating a viable, long-term state structure. The meticulous recording of his life in the Res Gestae and his conscious orchestration of his death and deification demonstrate that Augustus sought not merely to rule, but to control his immortality. His final act was to turn his life into a perfect, indelible work of political art, securing his place as the unique, indispensable founder of the Roman Empire. We have explored the man, his reforms, and his final statement. To conclude this extensive journey, we will summarize the final, overarching facts about his uniqueness as a ruler, his impact on timekeeping and language, and the enduring power of his name, bringing the count to a perfect 100 facts. The eternal legacy and the end of the age. The personal habits, discipline, and daily life of Augustus served as the moral foundation for the new regime. After decades of relentless rule, the final challenge was not to survive, but to die in a way that preserved his creation. This concluding phase involves securing his narrative through his personal memoir and ensuring the smooth transition that guaranteed the permanence of the Augustan age. The creation of the Res Gestae Divi Augusti. Recognizing the power of controlling one's narrative, Augustus, toward the very end of his life, personally composed a highly selective, first-person account of his accomplishments, titled Res Gestae Divi Augusti, The Deeds of the Divine Augustus. This document was intended to function as his definitive political autobiography and a lasting political blueprint for the continuity of the Principate. It stands today as a masterpiece of calculated political communication and sophisticated state propaganda, carefully curated to frame his entire reign as an inevitable, divinely favored success. The mandate for public display. Augustus, fully aware of the power of monumental public messaging, left strict, specific instructions in his will for the Res Gestae to be engraved on monumental bronze pillars and publicly displayed outside his massive, imposing mausoleum of Augustus in Rome. This ensured maximum, continuous visibility in the capital for future generations. Furthermore, copies were mandated to be distributed and carved into durable stone on the walls of temples throughout the empire. The most complete and best preserved surviving copy of this entire document, found meticulously inscribed on the walls of the Temple of Augustus and Roma in Ancyra, modern Ankara, Turkey, is famously known today as the Monumentum Ancyranum, which serves as the primary and most vital source for understanding Augustus's own calculated view of his 60 years in power. The structured narrative of the document. The Res Gestae is systematically and brilliantly structured into 4 distinct sections to cover every aspect of his imperial claim and justify his singular position. Political life and honors, detailing his offices, expenditures, and generosity, listing his massive spending on the public, military deeds and diplomacy, summarizing his victories and treaties, and the status of the princeps, asserting his supreme authority. This meticulous organization provided an authoritative, unchallenged summary of his life. The central propaganda of restoration, the central, deliberate, and necessary fiction perpetuated by the entire Res Gestae, is the concept of restoration. Augustus consistently emphasized that he was not a revolutionary or a dictator, but the humble citizen who, facing chaos, had restored the Republic and formally handed back the state to the Senate and the Roman people. This carefully crafted narrative served as the ultimate political shield, legitimizing his absolute one-man power by paradoxically denying its autocratic existence, appealing to the traditional Roman respect for republican institutions. The strategic omission of violence. In this final public accounting intended for posterity, Augustus strategically and meticulously omitted any direct mention of the civil wars, the brutal proscriptions, or the execution of his personal and political enemies. The figures of Mark Antony and Lepidus are simply coldly referred to as the faction that made war on the Republic. This deliberate sanitization of the violent reality of his ascent was paramount for cementing his public image as the peaceful, benevolent restorer of law and order, necessary for securing the public's long-term acquiescence to the Principate. The Auctoritas claim. Augustus cleverly concluded the Res Gestae by making a crucial, masterful distinction. He stated that while he held no more official power than his many Republican colleagues, a technically legalistic but functionally false claim, he surpassed everyone in Auctoritas, a uniquely Roman concept meaning prestige, influence, or moral authority. This term effectively summarizes the invisible but ultimate source of his true, lasting power. The profound reverence, trust, and moral sway he commanded from the military, the Senate, and the general populace due to his achievements and longevity. The final illness and death. Augustus died on August 19th, 14th AD, at the age of 75, after a long life marked by continuous illness. He died in the town of Nola, near Naples, in the very same house where his own father had died decades earlier, providing a convenient, full-circle narrative. The historian Suetonius notes that his devoted wife Livia was at his side, reinforcing the carefully managed public image of a peaceful, inevitable, and domestic conclusion to his long life, contrasting sharply with the violence of the late Republic. His alleged last words, his legendary final words according to the historian Suetonius, were not purely political, but deeply theatrical and revealing of his self-awareness. He is famously said to have asked those around him if he had played the part well in the comedy of life, mimum vitae. This phrase is profoundly revealing, suggesting that even in his final moments, Augustus was keenly aware that his entire reign had been a calculated public performance, a carefully managed role designed to establish and maintain the fundamental stability of the empire. his public funeral and deification. Following his death, Augustus was given a magnificent and highly symbolic public funeral in Rome. His body was cremated and his ashes were placed in the enormous mausoleum of Augustus. Crucially, the Senate immediately and formally deified him, proclaiming him Divus Augustus, the divine Augustus. This ensured that the imperial cult was permanently tied to his name, and that his title of Divi Filius, son of the divine, passed legally and seamlessly to his chosen successor, Tiberius, ensuring the new regime had immediate divine sanction. The political will and instructions. In his final will, Augustus made several key provisions beyond his personal inheritance. He left cash bequests to every Roman citizen and to the Praetorian Guard, securing the loyalty of both the people and the key military unit. He also left specific instructions to his successors, including the critical advice to keep the empire within its current boundaries, defined by the Rhine and Danube rivers, recognizing the limits of Rome's military and financial capacity. The eternal legacy of the Pax Romana. Augustus's most enduring and tangible legacy was the Pax Romana, Roman peace, an unprecedented foundational period of peace, internal stability, and massive prosperity that ultimately lasted for over 2 centuries. This era of order and secure trade transformed the entire Mediterranean world, allowing for an immense flourishing of commerce, standardized law, and infrastructure across 3 continents, a gift of order to a chaotic world. The establishment of the Julian-Claudian dynasty. Though he faced immense personal tragedy in his attempts at succession, the system Augustus established successfully ensured the continuous transition of power to Tiberius, thereby initiating the Julian-Claudian dynasty, which included the subsequent rulers Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. This established the vital, non-republican precedent of hereditary succession that defined the entire imperial system for centuries. The unification of the empire. Augustus single-handedly unified an empire fractured and exhausted by a century of relentless civil war, transitioning it from a perpetually warring republic to a globally stable autocratic state. His governance model, the Principate, lasted for over 450 years in the West and over 1,400 years in the East, a testament to his sheer political and administrative genius in creating a viable, long-term state structure. The name that changed the calendar, revisited. The name Augustus itself was immortalized and permanently etched into the fabric of time by the Roman calendar. The month of August, formerly the month of Sextilis, was formally renamed in his personal honor by the Senate, celebrating his luckiest month, which contained the anniversaries of his greatest victories and the end of the civil wars. The power of the imperial title, revisited. Augustus's conscious and continuous use of the military title imperator, commander, as a permanent first name fundamentally changed the word's meaning. He transformed it from a simple military honor into an inheritable title of supreme political and military authority, thereby making it the structural root of the modern term emperor in nearly all European languages. The title Pater Patriae, revisited, in Secus BC, the Senate and the Roman people formally bestowed upon Augustus the highest civic title, Pater Patriae, Father of the Country. This honored him as the benevolent, selfless protector and moral guardian of the entire Roman state, placing him on the level of Rome's legendary founders. The meticulous recording of his life in the Res Gestae and his conscious orchestration of his death and deification demonstrate that Augustus sought not merely to rule, but to control his immortality. His final act was to turn his life into a perfect, indelible work of political art, securing his place as the unique, indispensable founder of the Roman Empire. The Augustan world, statistics, infrastructure, and the imperial scale. Having established the political structure and the narrative of his reign, the true measure of Augustus's achievement lies in the sheer scale and scope of the empire he managed. He transformed a warring collection of territories into a unified economic and administrative zone with statistics that boggle the modern mind. This final section focuses on the quantifiable reality of the Augustan age, the population of the empire. At its zenith under Augustus, the Roman Empire encompassed an estimated 50 to 60 million people. This made it the most densely populated and politically unified state in the Western world at the time. This massive population base was the source of Rome's legions, its labor force, and its immense tax revenue, allowing for the unprecedented scale of public works and military defense. The census figures and citizen count. Augustus personally oversaw and recorded 3 major censuses, 28 BC, 8 BC, 14 AD. The census of 14 AD, conducted in the final year of his life, recorded a total number of Roman citizens, as men, women, and children, at approximately 4,137,000. This figure represents only citizens, showing the disparity between the ruling class and the vast subject population. The size of the Roman army. Following the final reductions after the civil wars, Augustus standardized the army at 28 permanent legions, with each legion numbering roughly 5,000 men, plus non-citizen auxiliaries. The total standing military force commanded by the princeps was approximately 150,000 legionaries, supplemented by an equal number of auxiliary troops. The annual military budget. To fund this professional army, including their standardized pay, retirement bonuses, the aerarium militare, and frontier defenses, the annual military expenditure consumed an estimated 2/3 of the state's total annual revenue. This vast and consistent allocation of funds was the price of the Pax Romana and the single largest cost of the Augustan state. The length of the imperial frontiers. After setting the natural boundaries, the total length of the actively defended Roman frontiers along the Rhine, Danube, and the east was estimated to be around 5,000 to 6,000 miles. Maintaining continuous watch and defensive garrisons along this massive perimeter consumed the majority of the professional legions. The naval strength. Augustus recognized the need for permanent naval power to secure trade and supply lines. He established 2 main permanent fleets, the Classis Missinensis, based at Misenum on the western coast of Italy, and the Classis Ravennas, based at Ravenna on the Adriatic coast. These fleets maintained Roman naval supremacy over the entire Mediterranean Sea, Mare Nostrum. The road network length. Augustus inherited a fragmented road system, but dramatically expanded it. The total length of the great stone-paved Roman road network during his reign was estimated to be around 50,000 miles, with over 20,000 miles of these being main arterial highways essential for military deployment and the cursus publicus. The speed of the imperial post. The establishment of the cursus publicus allowed for astonishing speeds in official communication. Relaying messages and personnel along the main roads, the imperial post could achieve speeds of up to 50 miles per day for dispatches and significantly faster for urgent military or governmental reports. fundamentally shrinking the effective size of the empire. Grain consumption of Rome. The city of Rome itself was an administrative and logistical marvel. Its population of roughly 1 million people required an estimated minimum of 250,000 tons of grain annually to feed itself. Ensuring the continuous, safe transport of this grain from Egypt and North Africa was the most critical non-military function of the Augustan administration. The number of public slaves and imperial freedmen, the day-to-day operations of the imperial household, the public works, and the state bureaucracy were run by a massive staff of public slaves and imperial freedmen. The number of these individuals employed in central government administration in Rome likely numbered in the thousands, holding immense functional power in finance, the maintenance, and record-keeping. The city's architectural scale. Augustus famously claimed he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. The Forum of Augustus, the Arapacis, the Mausoleum of Augustus, and the Temple of Mars Ultor represent just a fraction of the over 80 public buildings that he boasted of rebuilding or personally constructing during his reign, visually transforming the capital. The gold reserve, the annexation of Egypt following the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra provided Augustus with an immense and immediate infusion of wealth, an estimated 700 million denarii, or roughly 1,750 tons of gold and silver. This single act secured the foundation of the imperial treasury and financed the decades of the Pax Romana that followed. Coinage production and stability. Augustus reformed the currency system, ensuring a high degree of metallic purity in the new gold, aureus, and silver, denarius coinage. This monetary stability, backed by Egypt's wealth, was crucial for facilitating the massive interprovincial trade that defined the Augustan economic boom, ensuring that money accepted in Spain was trusted in Syria. The water supply system. To sustain the growing population and the new marble structures, Augustus substantially repaired and expanded Rome's elaborate system of aqueducts. By the end of his reign, the city was supplied by at least 9 major aqueducts, capable of delivering an estimated 200 to 250 million gallons of fresh water per day for public baths, fountains, and private homes. The duration of the Augustan peace, the Pax Romana, the peace and stability ushered in by Augustus's political settlement, is conventionally dated from the peace closure of the Temple of Janus in 29 BC and is considered to have lasted for over 200 years, demonstrating the remarkable durability of the system he engineered. The number of senators. While Augustus maintained the Senate as a ceremonial body, he purged it of unreliable members after the civil wars and standardized its number at 600 members. He also established wealth qualifications and moral standards for membership, ensuring the Senate remained an elite, controllable, and largely supportive institution. The provincial grain tax. To fund the capital and the military, Augustus standardized the taxation of grain from the provinces, particularly Egypt and North Africa. This tax, often known as the annona, guaranteed a continuous supply of food and revenue, making the empire's vast geography a functional economic unit. The size of the Praetorian Guard. The elite Praetorian Guard, established for the emperor's protection, consisted of 9 cohorts, totaling around 4,800 to 9,000 men, depending on how the number of supporting troops is counted. Their proximity to Rome and their high pay made them a decisive political force, despite their relatively small numbers. The number of public libraries. Augustus was a great patron of learning. He established and dedicated several major public libraries in Rome, including the one in the Temple of Apollo on the Palatine and another in the Porticus Octavia, ensuring public access to the empire's literary wealth and promoting intellectual life. The maximum naval speed. While the imperial post on land was fast, maritime transport was the bottleneck. Under favorable winds, a cargo ship might travel from Alexandria to Puteoli, near Naples, in about 9 to 14 days, showcasing the immense time required to move bulk goods like grain across the vast Mediterranean. The end of Roman slave imports. Though slave ownership continued, the end of large-scale offensive wars following Augustus's policies meant that the massive, continuous influx of war captives who served as slaves largely dried up. This shifted the source of slaves to reproduction within the empire, forcing a change in the internal economics of labor, the establishment of veteran colonies. To pay off and demobilize the massive armies from the civil wars, Augustus established and oversaw the settlement of veterans in at least 28 new colonies across Italy and the provinces, giving land to over 300,000 men and simultaneously spreading Roman culture and influence. The sheer scale of the Augustan state, from the millions of citizens to the thousands of miles of roads and the hundreds of millions of gallons of water, demonstrates that the Principate was not merely a political theory, but a massive, complex, and highly effective logistical system that transformed the ancient world. The final, lasting impact of Augustus was his systemic reform of Roman law, justice, and societal conduct. He recognized that military victory and economic stability were temporary without a corresponding moral and legal renewal. His final decades were dedicated to cementing a new legal framework that reflected the Pax Augusta and secured the moral future of the Roman elite for centuries. The codification of the civil law foundation. While the full comprehensive codification of Roman law occurred centuries later under the Byzantine Empire, Augustus initiated the critical process of systematizing and unifying the vast body of civil law, ius civil. He actively encouraged and funded legal scholars to organize the often conflicting and confusing mass of republican edicts, statutes, and judicial precedents, beginning the slow but essential bureaucratic process that would eventually lead to the definitive legal structures of the Roman Empire and influence modern law. The establishment of the right to respond, ius respondendi. Augustus created the legal concept of ius respondendi, the right for select jurists to give binding legal opinions on his direct authority. He personally selected a limited number of eminent trusted jurists and granted them the exclusive privilege to issue opinions that held the force of law throughout the empire. This centralized and standardized legal interpretation, moving it away from the unpredictable political arena and placing it firmly under the ultimate authority of the princeps. The law of treason, lex Julia Majestas. Expansion. Augustus severely expanded and rigidly enforced the lex Julia Majestas, or the law concerning the diminishing of Roman state dignity, treason. Under his direction, this law was broadened to include not just military acts against the state, but also verbal assaults, libel, or insults directed toward the person of the princeps or the imperial family. This expansion was a powerful legal tool used to suppress political dissent and secure the sacred, untouchable image of the emperor. The reform of the jury system. The republican system of juries and permanent courts, questions, had become notoriously corrupt, inefficient, and susceptible to bribery during the late Republic. Augustus enacted sweeping reforms to the jury system, drastically raising the property qualifications for jurors and instituting much stricter penalties for judicial corruption. His primary goal was to restore the integrity and public trust in the administrations of Roman justice, making the courts a reliable tool of the central government. The creation of the tribunals of the princeps. Alongside the traditional republican courts, Augustus established new, specialized tribunals where the princeps acted as the final appellate judge. This gave him direct, immediate control over high-profile legal cases and constitutional matters, ensuring that legal and political outcomes were always consistent with the needs and stability of the new regime. This practice evolved into the emperor's court, becoming the ultimate and final source of justice across the entire empire. The institution of the military treasury, aerarium militare, to address the perennial, destabilizing problem of paying veterans, the main engine of the late Republican civil wars, Augustus created the aerarium militare, military treasury, in 6 AD. This was a special, dedicated military fund entirely funded by a new 5% inheritance tax and a 1% sales tax on public auctions. This fiscal innovation guaranteed a stable, non-political source of funds for soldier pensions, securing the Army's long-term loyalty to the state structure rather than to individual ambitious generals. The law on public violence, Lex Julia de Vi Publica. Augustus formalized laws that strictly defined and severely punished acts of public violence, riots, assassinations, armed gangs, etc. This was a direct legal reaction to the political turmoil and brutal street fighting that had plagued Rome in the time of figures like Clodius and Milo. The law allowed the state to swiftly use overwhelming force to suppress any actions that threatened public order, thus successfully centralizing the monopoly of legitimate violence under the emperor. The expansion of Roman citizenship. While fiercely protecting the existing status and privileges of Roman citizens, Augustus began the careful, controlled process of expanding Roman citizenship to select individuals and entire communities in the provinces. This was often granted as a direct reward for loyalty, exceptional service, or adoption of Roman culture. This gradual, controlled extension of rights helped integrate the vast territories and secured the long-term allegiance of influential provincial elites to the Augustan regime. The moral symbolism of the Forum of Caesar. While building his own forum, Augustus also dedicated time and resources to finishing the projects of his adoptive father. He personally dedicated the Forum of Caesar in 29 BC, including the Temple of Venus Genetrix, Venus the Ancestress. This act served as a direct architectural link, connecting the new Augustan regime to the legendary, divine, and moral past, thereby legitimizing his rule through ancestral piety. The revival of Roman sculpture. The Augustan age ushered in a distinct classicizing, idealized style of sculpture. This aesthetic choice deliberately moved away from the blunt, aged realism and intense portraiture of the late Republic and emphasized youth and idealism and eternal calm, qualities perfectly embodied in iconic statues like the Augustus of Prima Porta. This art was explicit propaganda, presenting the princeps not as a temporary politician, but as a timeless, serene, and divinely favored leader. The patronage of history, Livy. Augustus actively patronized the great historian Titus Livius, Livy, whose monumental work, Ab Urbe Condita, from the founding of the city, celebrated the moral strength, discipline, and pietas of Rome's ancient past. Livy's work provided a grand, moral framework for the Republic's history, subtly suggesting that Augustus's reign was the inevitable culmination and necessary restoration of those ancient virtues, giving the new state a prestigious literary history. The new official title of Tiberius. The title Augustus conferred upon Tiberius was carefully constructed to transfer authority flawlessly. Tiberius Caesar Davi, Augustiphilius Augustus. This lengthy title ensured that Tiberius was legally recognized as the son of the divine Augustus, Divi Augusti Filius, and was also granted the sacred, unparalleled title of Augustus itself, thereby transferring the moral authority and divine sanction immediately and officially to the new ruler. The creation of the commissioners, curatores, to manage the administrative complexity of Rome's growing urban infrastructure, Augustus created permanent administrative boards staffed by elite senators and knights called curatores, commissioners. These specialized boards managed public works, roads, curator viarum, aqueducts, curator aquarum, and the Tiber's banks, professionalizing the management of the capital city and shifting power from elected officials to appointed experts. The end of private armies. The most fundamental legal shift of the Augustan age was the near total centralization of military control. Through his sole control of the imperial provinces and the supreme military command, Imperium Proconsular Maius, Augustus effectively made it illegal for any private citizen, no matter how wealthy or powerful, to raise and maintain a private army. This legal control was the singular, decisive factor that ended the civil wars by neutralizing the threat of ambitious, rival generals forever. The law on manumission, lex fufia caninia. To prevent the chaotic and massive granting of citizenship through the freeing of former slaves, manumission, Augustus introduced the lex fufia caninia in 2 BC. This law placed severe legal limitations on the number of slaves a master could free in his will, ensuring that the growth of the Roman citizenry remained a controlled, slow process managed by the central authority and not by private citizens. The imperial treasury, fiscus, versus public treasury, aerarium. Legally, Augustus maintained the traditional republican treasury, the aerarium, controlled by the Senate. However, he cleverly created his own vast fiscus, imperial treasury, funded by new imperial taxes and the immense wealth of Egypt. The fiscus quickly eclipsed the aerarium in importance, ensuring the princeps controlled the vast majority of the empire's actual wealth and all military expenditures, rendering the Senate's financial control largely symbolic. The finality of the Augustan settlement. The most potent legal and cultural legacy of Augustus was the establishment of the precedent of the Principate. After his death, no major political faction seriously contemplated restoring the old republic. His system was so successfully entrenched that the Roman world accepted the inevitability of one-man rule forever after, ensuring that his legal and political architecture became the permanent structure of the Roman Empire, enduring for centuries. The legal, social, and cultural reforms of Augustus constituted a slow-moving, deep-rooted revolution. By the time of his death, Roman society, the judiciary, and the Elite's moral code were completely redefined by the will of the first princeps, securing the moral and legal underpinning of his eternal peace.